this will then come to the fore during the 100 Years' War. The 100 Years' War is a bit of a misnomer because it lasted longer than 100 years. It was actually 116 years. It also, in modern terms, really wasn't that much of a war. In a sense, there were periods of fighting with long peace treaties, I guess, between them. So nobody during this period would have said, oh, this 100 Years' War is such a pain. It keeps going on and on, because it was only after the fact that it was actually called the 100 Years' War. But what the war was about, looking back, was, again, two royal houses in competition for the title of King of France. So you have a dynasty that had ruled, I guess in France from 987 to 1328, the Capetians, and the last Capetian monarch died. And as was always the case, I guess, in Europe, wars usually break out when it's not clear who the successor is going to be. So you have, if you look at kingship, if you look at lawful kingship, we have what's called, I guess, the lineages. And invariably, what you'll have ancestor A having, let's say, we'll say for sake of simplicity, 3 sons, B, C, and D. And eventually they will have, I guess, their lines. So let's say the Capetian line would have been, I guess, line C. The last king dies. Then these families, these lineages, know that they're, in a sense, that they're related to this ancestral king. So if this line dies out, these two lines will say, well, in that case, we should be the ones assuming the new title. So this is essentially what you have. The 100 Years' War is about two different lineages that will go, in a sense, that will be in conflict, that will be fighting each other over a period of 116 years to finally decide who is going to be, in a sense, the one that will assume the title of King of France. So you have, on the French side, you have the House of Valois. And on the English side, you have, in a sense, the royal house of the Plantagenets, which again are descended from these Norman conquerors that had established themselves, I guess, in England. So, and over time, in a sense, they had lost territory, in a sense, to, I guess, competing House of Valois. So the death of the last Capetian was a way for, in a sense, the royal house based largely in London to, in a sense, to expand, to try and, I guess, gain greater territory in, I guess, in France. But here's a little environmental fact, is that right now, we talk about global warming. But in this period of, I guess, in history, we are in what is called, I guess, often called the Little Ice Age. So in this period, I guess, of European history, it's getting a lot colder. It's all of a sudden, before this period, you had a period that where it got a lot warmer. So in much ways, in a sense, William conquered England when it was getting warmer, where all of a sudden you could grow grapes, I guess in England, you could make wine, I guess in England, where it was a lot easier in a sense to grow, I guess, a number of food produce. And roughly in the 1200s, 1250, a deep freeze sets in, where all of a sudden forget about growing wine in England, where it gets, in a sense, a lot harder to maintain agricultural production. And at that point, it becomes very nice to have territories that are now all of a sudden in a much more southern locale. So you have, in a sense, you have political factors, you have some environmental factors, which in a sense, which are pushing, that encourage, in a sense, the kings that are now based in London to renew their claims on more southern regions, of the continent, i.e., of France. So these, in a sense, are motivating, I guess, the two sides in a sense to try to establish their sovereignty over, I guess, over this region. And again, it all comes down to, again, William had a successor, Geoffrey Plantagenet, whose granddaughter Matilda, their son Henry, et cetera, et cetera. So this line would become the line that finally would establish the King of England. And this dynasty is also called, I guess, the Angevin, from the French region Anjou. So in a sense, again, it sort of highlights the geographical origins. So these Normans were coming from, I guess, territories in a sense where they were lords, and I guess in France, and had imposed themselves as, I guess, the nobility, I guess, of England. And this dynasty would last until the death of Richard III, and I guess who died in battle in 1485. So again, so we can see is this period, it is a question of succession, a question of conflict over who is going to be, in a sense, the rightful king, I guess, the rightful king of France. And I guess the Plantagenets could have won, but unfortunately for them, there's one woman who played an interesting role in, I guess, in history. And any guesses as to which French woman during the which French woman is best known from the period of the 100 Years' War? Exactly, good old Joan of Arc, who motivated the sort of wishy-washy, King Charles, and who encouraged him, in a sense, who she was playing a role to try to encourage Charles to do battle against the Plantagenet forces in order to drive, in a sense, we could call them, to drive them out of France. So eventually she led, some troops in battle. Eventually was captured by, in a sense, by the English forces. She was, in a sense, tried, convicted of heresy, and burnt at the stake. So, but in certain ways, her historical role may be overplayed, but right now, in terms of why she is so important to, in a sense, to more contemporary French ideas of nationhood, is because of the role that she has been given credit for helping to drive, in a sense, the English forces out of France, and in order to ensure, in a sense, that the French kingdom would be separate, in a sense, from the control of the Plantagenets.